a very harsh person on the speakers because I was not allowed to eat before the talk because I was worried I would be late. And I was not allowed to read my paper, but I'm going to read it anyway. Click, click, click. This is the only thing I heard when I interviewed Stephen Hawking for the first time. No sound, no voice, no facial expressions, maybe a soupçon of a smile and a few imperceptible movements of his fingers, caressing the commutator as he selected words on the screen. Today, the movement of his fingers has permanently vanished to be replaced by the muscles of his cheek to coordinate an infrared connection to his computer. For those who know him, he can communicate with his eyes, but for the rest of us, his sole means of communicating is his computer. As you know, maybe almost 50 years ago, Stephen Hawking developed ALS, more commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. The disease is characterized by the slow destruction of all the body's muscles, while the mind remains unaffected. Hawking has become a kind of a brain in a vat. He is universally known as one of the greatest cosmologists of our time and one of the most brilliant physicists since Einstein, reaching an iconic status as the smartest person in the world in shows such as The Simpsons, Star Trek, or The Big Bang Theory. In a way, my talk could stop here. There is nothing really mysterious about what I have just recounted. Hawking fits perfectly well with our conception of how science and its heroes, the Newtons, the Einsteins, and the Hawkings work. To do science or to be a genius, all one needs to have is a powerful, a beautiful mind. And indeed, because of his disability, Hawking seems to embody the mythical figure of a genius, capable of grasping the ultimate laws of the universe with nothing but the strength of his reasoning. In brief, since he can't move his body, everything must be in his mind, and indeed, what else would a theoretical physicist need? This is always the representation you have of Stephen Hawking, which is a big brain connected to the laws of the universe. What else does he need? Much more than this, for sure, and it's what I'm going to argue in this talk, and it's what I argued in my book. Contrary to the image generally presented of him, Hawking does not have a mind free from all worldly constraints, for it is precisely because he suffers from a disability that he appears more incorporated than any other theoretician. Indeed, insofar as he is unable to make his own body function, many of the motor and cognitive operations, normally unseen because incorporated in a single body, as in the case of an able-bodied physicist, are delegated and incorporated in other bodies, such as technicians, students, assistants, and machines. Thus, his disability becomes a window for me as an ethnographer, and maybe for you as I'm going to show, on our representation of how science and scientists work, and how the work of science itself functions. On the one hand, his case shows us, through an analysis of the popular media, I show a few quotations, what a perfect scientist is or should be. It's, again, a pure mind. On the other hand, it shows that Hawking is not different from other scientists because he has a disability. But because he has this disability, he allows us to see how all scientists work, and again, this is what I'm going to show. This is what I have discovered as an anthropologist, curious to understand not only other cultures, but also our own, that has granted ultimate power and authority to science and its heroes. This is what I have discovered as I began an in-depth ethnographic study of the Hawking phenomenon. Hawking, in a word, became my tribe. I followed him as he worked, produced theories, resolved the problems, gave talks, and participated in documentaries. I also, of course, interviewed all the people with whom he worked, the nurses, the personal assistants, the students, the colleagues, and the journalists. I soon discovered that Hawking's genius, far from being the product of his mind alone, was profoundly located, material, and collective in nature. In other words, in order to understand the functioning of his mind, I had to understand the work of delegation, multiplication, and redistribution of competencies to people and machines, without which he would be unable to act and to think. I refer here specifically to the mobilization of the competencies of his computer, those of his students, spread across very, very different research fields, which enable him to integrate diverse information and the different facets of a problem, and those of his secretary, who sorts and arranges data according to his interests and to what he can process. Hawking's condition makes necessary the mechanization. By mechanization, I mean the hierarchization, the standardization, and the routinization of his human-machine-based environment. This network of competencies composed of machines and human beings, again his computers, students, colleagues, secretaries, that I call Z-standard body, allows a yes or a no to become operational. A yes answer to the question, do you want to go to this conference, will allow him to travel from one end of the earth to the other without having done anything more than twitching an eyeball. Indeed, it is this network that will do the work. Without the machine, you won't be able to write, read, and communicate unless you are familiar with him and can ask him questions to which he will respond by a yes or by a no precisely. The computers and programs extend the intellectual capabilities of Hawking and allow him to perform by endowing with the capacity to write articles, go to conferences, and respond to questions. His artificial voice, that you know, offers a double inscription as an instrument of thought. Indeed, what is well conceived is well said. This is all the more the case for Hawking, who does not speak. At the same time, this voice effaces and makes us forget the role of the machine insofar as it speaks for, comes from, and marks the presence of a public persona, despite the fact that every iterance is written in advance either by Hawking or by someone else on his computer. The secretary responds to the media, classifies and responds to his email, prepares his conferences. The students perform the calculations upon which his talk will be based. The graduate assistant is responsible for the mechanical part of the collective, the computer, the wheelchair, and the synthesizer. He's also responsible for the media. He responds to emails, phone calls, updates the website, and when it is a question of giving a conference, he books the plane tickets, prepares the image and diagrams, ensures the transportation and coordination of Hawking, his voice and his machine, from one point to another, while also taking care of his accommodation, the food, the journalists. The nurses will take care of all of Hawking's physical needs. Despite all this, one could say one more time that there is nothing really very specific about Hawking. Rather, his disability makes appearance the normally hidden practices of academics and scientists who shift the administrative aspects of their position onto others, and also the practices of managers who spend most of their time writing rather than talking, who lead their group with a simple yes or no, who delegate competencies to their subordinates, the assistants answer the phone, book the plane tickets, and respond to emails. Similarly, his disability makes appearance the practices of movie stars that delegate competencies to people who market their image. Their position at the top of the hierarchy authorizes the possibility of their practices, when conversely these practices make possible and allow the maintenance and enactment of his position as a star. However, in Austin's case, his competencies are more distributed, collectivized, and materialized than those of anyone else. For Hawking, language, but also his intellectual competencies, his identity, and even his own body become the property of a human-machine-based network rather than the individual. Is what I call a distributed-centered subject, that is not singular because it's outside the social and material world, as a kind of a brain in a vat, but because it's the most collective. In a way, this helps us rethink the dichotomy between individual versus collective. Think about the debates that shook our media during the electoral campaign. On one side, Mitt Romney and his fellow Republicans advocated the self-made man who doesn't need anybody to become who he is. On the other, Barack Obama and his fellow Democrats who believe in the power and the role of community in aiding individual achievement. A person without support is not in this sense freer, rather she is less than an individual. Someone who is powerful, on the other hand, is a collective, and the more collective she becomes, the more singular she seems. Indeed, just remember how tired Obama's strategists looked the night of the election. They too were part of Obama's brain, were they not? Who did what? How does one become the center and the brain? Hawking's example helps us rethink the dichotomy between those who are in charge and those who execute. Indeed, the assistants are supposed to do what the head has thought beforehand, but often they do most of the work. They complete, classify, attribute meaning, translate, and perform. Hawking's example helps us rethink the dichotomy between humans and machines. Humans, we are told, have subjectivity, a self, a consciousness, a rationality. Machines, on the other hand, are passive, neutral, and inert. However, Hawking's case demonstrates that the machine does much more than transcribe its thoughts. Rather, it makes him write and writes with him. It completes his sentences. It gives him a voice. It gives him the possibility of escaping questioners, accepting a yes or a no. It disrupts, and it also makes it possible for people to identify with him. The voice here plays a role not opposed to writing, for the written precedes the spoken. The voice too is indispensable in the fabrication of his identity. Without it, he can't perform. And for a certain extent, the voice becomes him, as for example, when it performs without him in the office of his assistant. Thus, Hawking doesn't just tell us about scientists, managers, stars, and politicians, but about all of us, insofar as the programs it uses are now used to one extent or another by just about everybody. We are, through email, Facebook, Twitter, texting, increasingly reliant on writing. Stephen Hawking was using these technologies from their inception. Indeed, he is entirely dependent on them, as we are all becoming. In the end, Hawking's example provides a window onto our current socio-technological and literary practices. Disability perhaps,